Okay. So are we ready to go? Okay. Thank you guys for coming. My name is Nell Gardner. I live in Adams Basin now, but I've moved a lot of times, and if you haven't kept up, it's not your fault. I have a problem keeping up as well. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history, and then I'm going to go into the history of cut flowers, and then I'm going to show you what I grow a little bit and show you how I make an arrangement. That sound like an idea? And you guys can ask questions. I also just launched a new website, and I have cards. It's flower-fields.com, and I have a sign-up sheet. I'm going to be writing a blog probably every couple of weeks, and you'll be able to read excerpts, not just about flowers, but about my life. So I was born in Maryland, and we moved, I don't know, maybe 15 or 16 times, and moved to Nova Scotia, Cape Breton Island, when I was 13. And that began the decline of my existence as a child. It was very difficult there. We had lived sort of off the grid before that. My parents were sort of teachers, but my father just kept moving and never kept a job. And so we ended up 4 children born in 4 different states. And I think there were sort of hippies maybe, but not doing the drugs or whatever. I'm still unsure of all of that, but they were. My father's father was a senator, and my mother's father was very successful. So they came from very successful families and decided that they would drop out of society, and their children would do a lot of work to help support this lifestyle, which involved no money and work all the time. So we moved to Nova Scotia, and there was no school after that, which was very difficult, and no running water, and no electric, and no phone, and no health care for the most part, because we lived a long ways away from any doctors. But I had a ruptured appendix at one point, which they had an ice pack on for a week, and then the neighbor decided to take me to the doctors, so they saved my life in the hospital. So anyway, it was a very interesting life, but it was difficult, and we learned a lot growing up. So I've learned from the ground up, so to speak, and not that I really wanted to. It was tough. There was no people. There was oftentimes not a lot of food. When we got to making $1,500 a year, that was break even, which was just money for taxes and food, or food for the horses, grain, because we had to make everything. So that's where I came from, and at a young age, I decided that I would go to college. My parents were big on education, although we weren't going to school, but we sort of studied on our own, and I got into Nova Scotia Agricultural College by the skin of my teeth, by sort of typing up a false resume, and not a resume, a transcript, and giving it to them, and yeah, it says physics on there. I've never studied physics in my life. So then I eventually moved down to New York, because I saw that New York was growing alfalfa. All the books were written by Cornell professors, and I swore somehow I would get to Cornell University, which I did. So I graduated from Cornell in '84 and started working for Cornell. Eventually, I started a cut flower farm in Batavia, and I think it's been in 4 different places. So I went to Springdale Farm, and then I lost my job there due to sexual misconduct of the owner. And I am going to just put that out there because it's true. And I was not going to be involved in that, and I lost my job. That's the reality of my life. I'm sorry to say that, but that happened, and so I was very sorry not to be working with that population. They were wonderful people, and horticulture fit right into what they were doing. Heritage Christian Services was the agency that ran it, and it's in Monroe County Park. So I landscaped with flowers. We had a little shop there. When that ended, I ran a boat tour for a while on the Erie Canal, and then I was offered a job at the Darwin Martin House in Buffalo, and at Grey Cliff, which is the Martin summer home on the lake. And I helped to restore those gardens for over 10 years. Actually, I was involved with them for like 14 years, and helped to bring those gardens into being, actually, because they were mostly destroyed. So the Martin House is fully restored, and Grey Cliff is fully restored. I was laid off at the Martin House due to the pandemic, have not been hired back there, but I still work at Grey Cliff. So right now I work 1 day a week at Gray Cliff, and I moved back here from Buffalo because I wasn't working at the Martin House, and I live in Adams Basin. I grow cut flowers, and I'm writing some books. If you can believe it or not, it's pretty easy to have stuff to write about. So that's a little bit of history. When I bought the farm in Spencerport, which some of you may remember was on Gillette Road, and when I bought it, I realized this had been a cut flower farm in the early 1900s, and I thought, that is really strange. So I'm restoring this place, finding all old relics that they grew plants and flowers here. So I set about to understand the history of that place, and that led me to the history of our flower city, which used to be the flower you eat, is now the flowers as in the pretty flowers that you grow. And I thought, how did that happen? What happened? What was this about? So that led me on a very interesting path of historical. I love history, and I love mining it from all the different resources. And if I spent more time on it, there is so much to know in Rochester. Rochester was the flower city because there were so many seed companies here. In fact, the seed industry, and I wish it wasn't so windy, I'd pass some of these pictures out. So across the road from me was a greenhouse that was Crescent Greenhouses, and they grew seed, and they also work with Harris Seed. Who remembers Harris Seed? I worked there. Oh, you worked there? Okay, so there was a couple of ladies in the Stettner family that had worked there, and they were in their 90s. I think one of them is still around, and they used to pollinate the flowers. So that's what you did. See, there we go. We have living proof here. So, yes. So it's amazing that Harris Seed was here, Mandeville and King was here, Crossman Seed was here, Vicks Seed was here. Rochester had the Erie Canal come through in 1825. When they came through, they discovered this amazing sandy soil. When I went to start digging up my farm, I had been living in Batavia when I was married, and I had a flower farm there, and it was horrible clay soil. It was either clay or gravel there. Here, I had a sandy loam. Does anybody have sandy loam in their yard? And I thought, what is this? It's the edge of the old Lake Iroquois and then the Lake Dawson. It's like up on Ridge Road, but it's south. And so this was a whole ream of sand that went right through Rochester, and that all these flower farms were, like if you go to Harris Seed, that's what their soil is, sandy loam. All the beautiful creek beds, that was all beautiful sandy loam soil laid down years and years ago. So I said how lucky I am. God finally loves me. He's giving me this farm to grow flowers. And I excavated all these old containers. They had a flower shop right there on the farm. So I basically restored what was there. In these pictures, if you want to come up and look later, or I can pass some of them out, there's a greenhouse. There's a picture of a greenhouse, and there's also, which was across the road, and the reason they were there is because of the sandy soil. They could dig it right out of the bank, and they used it right in their flats to grow seeds in. And then, of course, the sandy soil was easy to dig bulbs. It was just easy for horticulture to grow plants. The largest nursery in the history of the world was in Rochester. Does anybody know what that was? The Barry Alwanger Nursery? Alwanger Barry, 700 acres, and that's where Mount Hope Cemetery is. And they grew a lot of fruit trees and shrubs and things for landscape, but they did a lot of horticultural plants. So James Vick, Asa Rowe was on Reed Road in Churchville. He developed fruit trees. Fruit was a huge industry here. Greece was full of fruit trees until, I think it was the 1930s, they had a really bad freeze. They had to cut down a lot of the trees. They exploded at night. We had someone on the boat that said you'd go to bed a rich man and wake up a pauper because the trees would be exploded. So besides the fruit, there was a big cut flower industry. Before we bought flowers from Wegmans, flowers were grown everywhere in greenhouses. Scott's greenhouse in Corfu. Has anybody ever been there? So besides the seed industry, there was a cut flower industry. If you drive by greenhouses, there's a bank of greenhouses in Webster that's old and falling down. it probably grew cut flowers and tomatoes. So you see the big greenhouses with Intergrow now, and they deliver to Wegmans. There were small greenhouses everywhere. In fact, across the road from me in Spencerport was such a greenhouse that grew flowers and tomatoes and delivered them to Rochester twice a week. And all this information I have here has pictures of that. I'm hesitant to pass it out in the wind, but if you want to come look at it after. I also have pictures of the farm where I grew my flowers on Gillette Road, and there's a gentleman holding a bunch of glads, and then there's children on the wall with a basket of asters. Asters were developed in Rochester, and another big field of flowers right out the window of the farm. So there was probably about 40 acres, and a lot of it was flowers back in the early 1900s. So different cities were known for different things. Growing up, did any of you guys ever go to a greenhouse that had roses? Did you ever go to a greenhouse to buy roses? Here. So when I first started growing flowers in Batavia, I used to go to Attica Greenhouse, and they grew roses there, and I bought them and used them in my weddings right up for like 15 years. And then they went out of business. Slowly, every single greenhouse that grew cut flowers has gone out of business. Why is that? Because the cut flower industry has moved to South America, Ecuador, Colombia. That's where most of the flowers come from. In fact, some of them are even imported from New Zealand. So they come from all over the world, mostly South America. And they're cheaper because why? Mostly because of labor, land costs. So there, you see there's been a movement back to buy local, especially the pandemic. A lot of those flower farms went out of business. Who was getting married last year? Who was having an event? Nobody. So that means they had to shut down a lot of flower farms. They weren't buying flowers. Now what's happening? Everybody's doing everything, right? And so they're ramping up big time. They're ramping up and selling lots more flowers. So during this time of like transition and having people come back to buy local, you see a lot of local farm stands, right? You see a lot more local flowers. A lot more people are growing locally. However, it is a very small part of the market. At over 85% of the flowers are still imported. Almost everything you're going to buy at Wegmans is going to be imported. I work with Green Visions downtown, and they had a program where they were selling to Wegmans, and they're all local flowers grown in the inner city, and I help them know how to grow them and make bouquets out of them. But growing flowers and making bouquets is a complicated process. So they've simplified it, and they just grow certain things, and they send them up on trucks, and there's Wegmans trucks in Miami, or Sam's Club, or whatever, and then they come up here, they're all made into bouquets, and it's rather simple, and they're things that are very hardy. So you can't buy, like, local flowers that might not be able to be shipped, right? So I started my farm in 1992. There were 20 members of the Association of Cut Flower Growers. Now there are over 2,000. There's probably 2,500 across the country. This is their magazine, if you want to look at it afterward. The Cut Flower Growers Association is, it's basically international. There's most growers are in this country, but Canada also, and Canada, the US, and we have some members in England. So it's a big deal now, and they're growing more in hoop houses. You see, extending the season, and people are willing to pay a little bit more for something that's really fresh and that hasn't traveled 1,000 miles or whatever. So does anybody have questions about the flower industry around here in general, or what they did? So the way they shipped flowers back then, I want to tell you about what they did in Corfu. The man who ran Scott's Greenhouse in Corfu invented the refrigerated car for flowers. So he invented a way of shipping flowers in refrigeration from his farm to the rail cars that were refrigerated, and that's how he got flowers. He sent sweet peas to Washington, okay, to the White House, and they were grown in Corfu, and he shipped them because they have to be there within a couple of days, and they have to be refrigerated on the way. When I worked at the Martin House, Mrs. Martin had cut flowers. She had her own greenhouse. So many of the estates had their own greenhouses, grew their own flowers, but Scott's had a greenhouse in Buffalo on Main Street that they grew flowers. A lot of them were snapdragons, lilies, sweet peas were big, chrysanthemums. These are all things in the photos and in the literature that you can find that were grown then. A lot of the same things we have now, but there's also now we have alstroemeria, a lot of roses. They did grow some roses back then, but roses were more grown by a certain greenhouse would just grow roses. They were just rose greenhouses. There was a rose greenhouse in Albany that was huge, and I was very sad to hear that that's out of business too. Boston, they grew carnations. Different cities were known for different things, and then the flowers went to the flower market and were shipped all over. So what I want to do is tell you a little bit about my farm. There's a couple pictures here. This is zinnias in my field a long time ago. This is my dog Wags. Now I have a dog named Farmer. The way I grow flowers is actually my degree is in agronomy, which is agriculture. And the way I grow flowers is much more like you would grow a crop. So I don't just landscape with flowers. I grow it like it's going to be a crop. Like you want to get the best peas or the best corn or the best beans. Well, I want to get the best flowers. So I use trickle-in, you know, the drip tube hose, and it drips out water, and that goes into a header hose, and I can feed them like that. I can give them soluble fertilizer through the drip tape, okay? So I do it professionally, so I get a lot of flowers off a small area. When I grew flowers and had to make a living at it, a full-time living, before I worked at the Martin House or did all the other jobs I've done, I used to make about $30,000 an acre from flowers. That's a lot more than corn or beans or something, because I also don't want to grow flowers that I don't pick. So my mother came one time and saw my field of flowers. She goes, "They're a lot shorter than I thought." And I'm like, "No, that's because I cut them every day." So, you know, and if I want to have a lot of flowers for a wedding or something, I would fertilize them, wait a couple days, skip a day of picking, and then I'd really get a lot more flowers, and I cut them all and start all over. So if you go by a beautiful field of flowers, it means they're not cutting them all, and I want to maximize my use of flowers. A lot of times I also dry things, so I'll go through what I have here, and I'll show you what I dry, but when I dry them, then I had to figure out what to do with all the dried stuff. So I sort of invented this signature wreath where I use boxwood and not evergreen trees, but yew bushes, because the needles don't shatter. And I use boxwood and juniper and yew bushes and all kinds of dried flowers and peppers. And I just made them into wreaths, and now it's a thing. I do classes in it, and I have these little signature hot peppers and a lot of unusual things that I dry. Because I try everything. I've never taken a flower arranging class in my life. In fact, I don't really know how to arrange flowers. All I know is what I do and how it looks. And it's a signature way of doing things. So I want to show you kind of how I just made this bouquet in 5 minutes while I was waiting to set up. So in here we have feverfew. That's a perennial. You guys may grow that in your garden. Feverfew, it must have a medicinal use, right? Feverfew, it gets rid of fevers, I'm sure. Does anybody know what this bush is? This is a shrub. What's that? No. This is, what's that? What's that? No, it's, this is ninebark, purple ninebark bush. You'll see them, there might be one here, I don't know, but it's a pretty common landscape shrub. This is Coreopsis, this yellow. But this is a nice purple foliage, and you can combine that with yellow and different things. This is also Artemisia, and this is great for drying as well as fresh. So there's really nice foliage. I mix that with everything. I tell you, if I have my scissors and I see something new, I'll probably cut it and bring it home and see if I can use it. My son is like, he's 30 now, but when he was a kid, he used to say, "You know how embarrassing it is to have a mother like you?" jumps out of her car on the thruway and goes running off into the woods to pick something. Yeah. So anyway, he's gotten over that, I hope, anyway. So some of the stuff I use is a little unusual. Like this is a sedum that hasn't bloomed yet, but I like the foliage. It lasts forever. This is, everybody knows what this is, right? Spirea. You probably have it here. This is New Jersey tea. This is a shrub called New Jersey tea. I bought, my mom, Gardner, is a plants woman, and she's an author of many books. You can look her up. She's written a lot of books on old-fashioned gardens and also on biblical plants. And we were at a Herb Society meeting where she was speaking, and we bought this bush, and I didn't think it was going to make it, but it's doing really well. This is a hydrangea, and this is actually related to the wild hydrangea. Everybody thinks about hydrangea. They think, what, the blue or the pink? But this is really just like a native called smooth hydrangea you might find in the wild. And this is Annabelle, which is a cultivar of a native plant. Okay? So they call them nativars. So I grow that. So if you drive by my house, it looks really pretty, but I'm out there with my scissors cutting it. I've never seen what my gardens could look like if I didn't chop them every day. And then in the back, I have this long area with just annuals that I harvest every day. And the annuals aren't quite in yet. This is the first one. This is Blue Horizon ageratum. That's a really nice flower. It's taller than most. It'll get really tall, but these are some of the first stems. And I have some roses. This is the fairy rose. And I want to tell you this rose. Who knows what this rose is? Does anybody? Climbing rose. Okay. This, I see these roses everywhere. This is my neighbor's, by the way. But he doesn't know if it's missing, right? So I take care of his rose bushes for him. So this rose is the rootstock of a rose that was planted. And the rose died, but the rootstock grew. So this is very common everywhere, right? You'll see these rootstocks. Yes, and you'll get the big long stalks. Right, exactly. Behind us, he said, yes. And so if you buy a rose that's not on its own root, it reverts back to the rootstock, and that's a rootstock rose. It's okay. It just does get kind of leggy and wild, and you got to cut a lot of stuff back, and it's very thorny. But, you know, they can be pretty in their own right. This is, of course, the lady's mantle, and this is Centranthus ruber. It's a very nice perennial. Red valerian is another name for it. And then these are Thermopsis caroliniana. Thermopsis. It's like a Carolina lupin, which is a legume, right? Does anybody know what a legume is? What's that? Peanuts? I think peanuts are legumes. Peas are legume. Anything that fixes its own nitrogen is a legume, which means nitrogen is in the air and the soil and the air we're breathing, and it has rhizobial bacteria on it that actually fix nitrogen. This is one of my favorites. This is the fairy rose. Let's see, what else do I have in this bucket? This is a penstemon. See about this? That's a really nice picking one. That's a red, Husker's red, I think, penstemon. And this is a yarrow, yellow yarrow. I like it, only it doesn't smell good. And you want roses, you want your flowers to smell good. So in here I put some oregano. I always try to put something that smells good in my flowers. In fact, I grow cinnamon basil, which is here. And everybody, when you give them flowers, what do? They smell them. And what the flowers mostly don't smell, right? So this is cinnamon basil, and it smells like cinnamon and basil, and it's great. In fact, you guys want to pass that around, you can smell it. I give you something to smell. These are hosta stems, and they're starting to bud. And this is goat's beard. Goat's beard. I can't believe I can remember all these names. Goat's beard, which is a nice plant. And this is that same hydrangea, only they've made different colors. And this is a little pink one, and now they have a ruby one, and they have a dwarf one and a big one, and there's so many, and it's called Invincible Spirit, and $1 for every shrub goes to the Breast Cancer Society, and they've raised over $1 million. Yeah. And I've contributed a lot by buying off their plants. What else we have? I think that's what I have in here now. I'm going to show you what I did and how I made this bouquet. So the first thing I do when I am asked to do flowers, and I actually make a lot of bouquets every day, is you have fillers, okay? This is a good filler, right? It fills up space. And this is Solomon seal, variegated. Isn't that a beautiful leaf? And you want some green? And I just kind of start throwing stuff in, but I hold it loosely like this, and I keep turning it around as I do it. That almost looks pretty right like that. Then we're going to put some of these in, some of these dark colors. And it's kind of nice to stick with your rule of three of certain things. You don't have to do 3 of everything, but if you have 2 or 4, it kind of looks odd. This is a knockout rose. So I'm going to put that on the side. Cinnamon basil, yeah. Smells really good. So I'm going to put this beautiful hydrangea on the side. It's too big for the middle, but I want something to really stand out. So I'm going to try these roses and this beautiful pink. This is apricot foxglove. Foxglove is a beautiful old-fashioned plant, and it looks great next to the purple. So the way I do my bouquets is I pick them and I see what looks good together, and in the bucket, it's just how I'm just picking, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that today. So it's kind of pretty random, and then I just start building my bouquet and turning it and looking at it. A little yellow is nice. A little yellow sort of brings the other colors out. And something spiky with rounded, you want to mix the spiky and the rounded. I love this Carolina lupin. So pretty. So what do you think of that bouquet? Right? That's pretty good, and it's pretty easy, and you cut the ends of that and put it in warm water, and you put some solution in, and this will last probably at least, the last bouquet I had, it lasted by at least 10 days. If you want to, so I would put a rubber band on this and put it in a sleeve and sell it. I sell at Homesteads for Hope on Manitou. My flowers go there, and they also go to, in Adams Basin on Washington Street, and at the Pittsford Florist. They buy them and sell them. But my farm on Washington Street, yeah. So I don't want to do too much because I need to do my writing of my book, right, in the winter. So if you want to make this into a bouquet, you know, let's say you want a bridal bouquet that looks like that. That's right. That's pretty nice for a bridal bouquet, right? You could just wrap it in something like this. So you really just can take, it's not that hard. You just take, you know, some burlap or lace, or burlap with lace over it, and you wrap the bouquet, and there you have a little bridal bouquet. I mean, that's kind of I would probably pack the flowers in more and put more around the edge, but that's not a bad, like, bridesmaid bouquet or whatever. So, you know, the flower industry has really gone from being somewhat simple like this to being very, very stylized and complicated. So, you know, brides want this certain thing. It's usually whatever Martha Stewart's talking about. But back in the Martins' day, when they were living in their house, their daughter got married at the house. They put the tent in the middle of the yard. The peonies were on the side, and the bouquets were amazing. They wore these big hats, and they had bouquets with orchids tied. Mrs. Martin grew orchids, and the orchids were tied on ribbons and trailing on the bouquets. So even back then, they had all that fancy stuff. So the Martins were, okay, so Darwin Martin was he was born in New York, and he moved to, he was born in central New York, and his mother died when he was 5 or 6. He moved to New York. Actually, they moved to Nebraska with the family, and his father remarried, and I guess his stepmother wasn't very nice, and all the children sort of scattered, and he went to New York City and sold soap when he was 12 years old with his brother. He stayed in a boarding house, and he just longed for home. And he worked really hard, and he worked his way up in the Larkin Soap Company, and he became an executive in the Larkin Soap Company in, it would have been in the late 1800s. And he met Mrs. Martin in Buffalo. He moved to Buffalo, met Mrs. Martin, worked his way up, and decided to build this fantastic house in Buffalo. And he was very progressive, very smart and very progressive. The way he built his business is he took, he went to the library, and he only had an 8th grade education. But he went to the library and saw the card catalog system of keeping records of books, and he adapted that system to keep track of all the customers. So he had everybody's name on a card, and he had what they bought every week or month, and he wrote down what they ordered, and then they would call them and they would reorder, like what Amazon does now. They say, you just bought such and such, right? And it was the basic Amazon.com of its day. What they did is they sent stuff out. They were the largest mail order company in the world at the time, in the early 1900s. And so he made a lot of money, but he was very generous because he never forgot all the orphans and boys without homes like he had felt. And so he had subscriptions every month, and he gave money away. He was very philanthropic. And there's a school in Kentucky that still exists that he gave money to every year. When he died penniless, and Frank Lloyd Wright owed him $70,000. He was very generous with his money and a very kind person, and he had this amazing relationship with Frank Lloyd Wright. He believed in him, and he promoted him, and he hired him, and he gave him free license to do what he wanted. So Frank Lloyd Wright would say, oh yeah, the house is going to cost, $35,000, and it ends up costing $95,000. Basically, they were always triple the budget of what he said. So the Martin house is like a work of art. It has 400 art glass windows. Mrs. Martin loved flowers. That's why I got there. I went up there to volunteer, and I volunteered on the landscape, and then they hired me to run the landscape and help with the restoration. So she grew cutting gardens. There's an amazing florist cycle. It's really a beautiful landscape. It's not quite what it was because, of course, it's managed differently, more because the public goes through there, but it's really pretty spectacular. Then they hired, that was in 1905, that house was built, and they decided they used to go to the Lake Placid Club in Lake Placid. It burned down. They started to go to Canada, to the lake, and they wanted to build their own house. They designed one in Canada, but then they decided to build on Lake Erie on this side of the lake. So they bought part of the Rumsey estate, and they built, in 1928, they built, it's a beautiful house if you've never seen it. How many people have been there to Great Cliff? A few people? Do you like the house? It's beautiful, isn't it? The Martin house is a work of art, but Great Cliff is just, you want to stay there. You don't want to leave, It's open windows, and Mrs. Martin wrote what she wanted, and he delivered what she wanted. But the reason why he delivered what she wanted, and ladies remember this, she said to him, she stroked his ego about 10 times and said, you are such a important, talented, accomplished architect. Could you just please deliver me a bathroom with a window? Poor lowly me just wants a bathroom. And this was in the chimney. The bathroom is inside the chimney. And the window is made out of stone because the chimney is stone. So there is a bathroom in the stone chimney at Great Cliff. And the way she got it was just telling him what she wanted in such a way that he felt obligated to her. And Darwin was friends with him to the end through all of Frank Lloyd Wright's escapades, shall we say.
That's a good word. I can study it.
Have you? Okay. Escapades is good. Yeah, yeah. Does anybody else have questions? I kind of ran through the history pretty fast, but I think it's a fascinating history, and I think the more you look into it, the more you'll discover. There used to be salesmen here, and there's a thing called flower seed boxes. Have you guys ever seen them? You know about them? So the flower seed boxes, I have pictures of them, and I have several of them. They are boxes that had all the flower seed in those beautiful, gorgeous packets, right? Lined up in the box. And they went around to all the different places, nurseries and stuff, to sell their flower seed. And that is, they're collectible items. But the companies here had the flower seed boxes, beautiful. Mandeville and King, Crossman seed. Crossman is still here. But a lot of the seed is not grown here anymore. Most of the seed is grown actually out west or in Japan or in different countries. So I like, though, the tie back here where we still have people that worked growing flower seed. And a lot of it was for cutting flowers because they had those here. They had an aster flag on Manitou Road and the canal. And there's a field across the road, and I have a picture that was all China asters in red, white, and blue. And they have an American flag in the field. And that was an advertisement for their flowers. So, I mean, it was a big thing. Asters were the rage, and I still grow some China asters. They're really beautiful flowers. I grow zinnias, dahlias, lisianthus, all sorts of cool things. So thank you guys. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. You mentioned that people are saying buy local.
Yeah.
But also there's a movement towards buy native.
Okay.
Plant native.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so that's...
Many of the things that we have in our garden, I know they've been around a long time, but they are not native anymore.
Right. Right. So I take native with a grain of salt. Poison ivy's native. And I try to kill it at every opportunity because otherwise it'll kill me. But honestly, native plants grew up, it's just like, as you're a kid, you grow up, you go to a school, and you're in a classroom, and you have people from all over come in, and you've got to all play nice with each other, and you grow up together, right? Non-native plants come from all different countries. They come here and they're like, what's this soil about? And they don't feed the birds and the bees because they're not adapted together. So plants that grow up with the flora and fauna that's here feed, more bees, more butterflies, more birds, all of that, right? But there are plants that are non-native that are also helpful to all of those things. I'm not an expert in it, but I know that a lot of nurseries sell what they call natives and nativars. And a nativar would be this, or this Annabelle, or this pink hydrangea. So it's developed from a native plant, and it's a lot of native plants might not be adapted to your garden. For instance, Clematis virginiana will take over your house. It just will keep on going. But they have varieties of clematis of that same species that are more tame. So I do believe in native plants, but I don't think that all plants in your garden have to be native to help the ecosystem, honestly. And I'm not an expert in it, but I know that there are, certain plants that are not native that are very successful in producing nectar and pollen and things like that. It's just, a lot of it is basically, growing things, not using a lot of pesticides, staying away from having, spraying your lawn, leaving things a little more organic. I leave all the leaves in my beds, So, did that answer your question? Yeah.
A ground cover called snow crop. Are you familiar with that?
There's a lot of plants that have multiple names that are different. Snow crop sounds like snow on the mountain. Euphorbia, snow on the mountain. It's silver leaves with white flowers.
The white flowers are beautiful,
Yeah.
but I understand that out of Sarah's, and she said that she couldn't grow it. It would fall over, and she said you have to grow it from seed. And she also said it was like poison ivy. She had a terrible reaction from it. But I saw the flowers, and people had them, and I thought, oh, I love it as a ground cover, but I don't think I have been able to find it.
That's not geltweed, is it? Or bishop's flower, bishop's weed?
I don't think so.
Because bishop's weed will sting your hand and leave a mark. It's caustic on your skin. It's poisonous too. But I don't know. I haven't heard of snowcrop. I'll have to look it up. Unless it's a different name for something that I already know that,
And also, your little white flower there.
The feverfew.
I don't get the white flower. Why is that? I never, it just stays in the yellow.
It might not be the right variety.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of different varieties of feverfew.
Okay.
Yep, yep.
That's it.
Yeah, this is a double feverfew, so there's also a single one. There's all different types of it now, because it's a nice cut flower. Yeah. They've
Is
taken,
it invasive? Like the one I have is kind of
it kind of spreads, but it's not terrible. There are some really bad invasive plants, but that's not terrible. It's not like English ivy or privet or barberry or something you find in the woods. You know, there's a lot of things that have been banned.
What do you use to feed flowers?
I feed them a lot of compost, and then I put straw between the rows, and I put soluble fertilizer in the water it's like a Miracle Grow or something. Miracle Grow was invented in Geneva in order to ship on the Erie Canal with plants that went to Ohio in the west, so that when they got to where they were going, they could feed them and they'd all be successful. So Miracle Grow was invented here, and it's a very soluble, very available fertilizer. So I don't mind using Miracle Grow. The other one that I like is the Garden's Alive. It's a organic fertilizer. So I use both of those.
When you say you're always cutting down your flowers, is because you can grow up?
Because I'm selling them, so any flower that blooms that's any good, I cut it. And an annual will keep producing flowers it will keep producing flowers because it wants some seed. And you just cut a flower off that it can't make seed from, so it's going, okay, I'll send out another flower. So as long as you cut annuals, they'll keep sending shoots out. So I'll cut a zinnia, it'll send out a couple more flowers. So if you don't cut it to use it for a bouquet, then you have to deadhead it so that it will send more flowers out. And the lower you cut it, the better. If you have a snapdragon, nice big snapdragon, you have to cut it way down at like 2 nodes, and then it'll shoot out more flowers. Otherwise, you just cut the top off, and it just becomes this bushy thing.
The same with geraniums?
Yes, people are hesitant to cut closer to the bottom, and I cut lower than what most people would think of. Yep. Cut it off, be a hacker like me. Yes.
I have allium. What's the best way to dry them to keep the color?
You know, I don't know that. Probably in silicone. I dry a lot of my flowers, but I hang them upside down in my barn. I just hang them upside down in a dark place, and you could try that. You could pick it when it's pretty, but when it's open but not starting to go by, it has to be all the way open, and then before it goes by, and you could try hanging it. I don't know. I hang in a dark place in a barn, but if you want things to retain all their color, usually silicone, but I can't do anything fussy because I don't have the patience. So, but you could try that. Yeah.
Petunias that were dropping down, one of the gardeners suggested cutting down like wood, and they came back to
Yeah, right? Good.
fantastic.
Yes.
And cut them way down, too.
And when it comes to cutting, I use my ARS pruners, and I swear by these. These are the best for anybody with arthritis or hard time with your hands. This is what professional florists all use. They're ARS fruit pruners, actually, and they are wonderful for cut flowers. They're very sharp, I've had these for probably 30 years. You can really only buy them on Amazon usually. They also have heavier hand pruners. So look for ARS tools. It's like Felco, only they're Japanese and I feel that they're better. And they're better suited for women's hands that are smaller. Because all the mechanical engineers that develop tools are probably men, right? I mean, but our hands are not that big, so, uh-oh. Wow, that was a gust of wind. Well, you guys have been a really great audience. Thank you so much. And if you want to see pictures, come on up and check it out. And you can also sign up for my newsletter.